Welcome in, everyone, to this deep dive.
Yeah.
This one's going to be a little bit different. It's Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, and um,
Oh, yeah.
it's a very interesting book, and we're really only working with a handful of excerpts here, so it's sort of like trying to solve a puzzle with only a few pieces.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like you're getting these little snapshots of a much larger story. And it's a challenge to try to piece together what's really going on and what the bigger picture is.
Right, and right off the bat, you're kind of thrown into this world with Kathy H as our narrator, and she's a carer, but like, what does that even mean in this context?
Yeah.
And then there's all this talk about donations, and there's just this underlying sense of melancholy and unease, like something isn't quite right.
Yeah, and the way Ichiguro uses Kathy's voice is so effective because she's very matter of fact. She talks about these things that to us as readers are just horrifying, but she's almost nostalgic about them. It's like she's been conditioned to accept this reality, this fate that awaits her and her friends.
Yeah. And it's like she's holding back, too. Like there's this whole other layer of meaning beneath the surface that she's not saying.
Yeah.
Maybe not even fully aware of. And then you have this setting, Hailsham, this idyllic boarding school in the English countryside. It's almost too perfect, too sheltered, like a bubble, a world apart.
Right. So it's almost like a gilded cage in a way, this beautiful setting that actually just amplifies the sense of dread. And the way Ishiguro slowly reveals the truth about Hailsham and the student's purpose, it's masterful. He keeps you off balance, questioning everything.
Sure. So, okay, let's talk about some of the other characters. We got Tommy Cathy's childhood friend. He's got this kind of like anger bubbling under the surface, but he's also fiercely loyal and protective of Kathy. And then there's Ruth, this very complex character. She can be manipulative, but she's also vulnerable, just desperately seeking approval and belonging.
Yeah, and the relationships between these characters are so central to the story, Their friendships, their rivalries, their unspoken feelings for each other. It's all tangled up in this shared experience, this knowledge of their predetermined fate. And it's really heartbreaking to see how they navigate all of that, knowing that their time together is so limited.
It really makes you think about, if you knew your life had an expiration date, how would you live? What choices would you make? Would you rebel? Or would you just cling to hope, or would you just resign yourself to your fate?
Yeah, it's that question of what does it mean to be human when you're denied agency, when your existence is for the benefit of others, and yet you see these characters, despite their circumstances, they still yearn for connection, for love, for meaning. They create art, they listen to music, they fall in love, even though it's all temporary.
It's like they're trying to hold on to their humanity in this system that's trying to dehumanize them. And speaking of the system, there are these hints about the outside world, about the normal people who benefit from the clone sacrifices.
Yeah.
What do we make of that?
Yeah, it's interesting because Ishiguro doesn't give us easy answers. He doesn't paint the normals as these like evil villains. Instead, he focuses on how the system has just become normalized, accepted as necessary. It's kind of a chilling reflection on how societies can justify exploitation, how even horrific acts can become routine when they serve some greater purpose.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to us,
Yeah.
Asking us to look at our own world and our own complicity in systems of inequality and injustice.
Absolutely. And to think about the ethical implications of technology, of scientific advancements that maybe prioritize efficiency and utility over compassion and human dignity.
One detail that I found really interesting is this whole thing about the students trying to find their possibles. This idea that somewhere out there is the original person that they were cloned from. It's such a hopeful and heartbreaking idea. Like they're searching for this connection, this reflection of themselves in a world that denies them their individuality.
Right. It's like this powerful metaphor for the search for identity, for belonging. These clones, they're created for a specific purpose, stripped of their lineage, their history, and they're just trying to piece together who they are, where they come from. And it speaks to that human need for connection, for a sense of rootedness.
There are so many layers to this, and I'm already feeling the weight of these character stories.
Mm-hmm.
But before we go any further, I want to turn to you, the listener. What's resonating with you so far? What questions are you grappling with? Just hold on to those thoughts for a moment, because we'll be right back with more of our deep dive into Never Let Me Go. We're back, and wow, I'm still thinking about everything we just talked about with Never Let Me Go. It's just this world that Ishiguro creates. It feels so familiar and yet so unsettling at the same time, and I think as we look at these next excerpts, that line between like what's normal and what's not, it's going to get even blurrier.
Yeah, and that's what makes Ishiguro such a great writer. I mean, he takes these themes that we can all relate to, love and loss and memory identity, and he puts them in this really unique and disturbing context that makes us confront, what does it really mean to be human?
Right, exactly. And in these excerpts, one thing that stood out to me is how the students at Hailsham, they cling to these little acts of rebellion, like almost trying to assert their individuality in this system that's trying to define them purely by their function, like their purpose.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Right.
where they collect things and create art, and they're obsessed with pop culture.
It's like even in this incredibly oppressive environment, the human spirit still finds a way to shine through.
Yeah.
They express themselves, they connect with each other, they find beauty and meaning in the world, and it just makes their ultimate fate even more tragic.
Oh, for sure. Like that scene where Kathy finds Tommy's lost tape, the one that was so important to him, and then later we find out he's destroyed all of his artwork. It's like he's just giving up, surrendering to this path that's been laid out for him.
But I don't think it's just giving up, though. There's anger there, too.
Right.
Like a frustration with how unfair it all is. And you see that anger come out when he confronts Kathy and Ruth about the rumors of deferrals. This idea that maybe they could delay their fate. It sparks something in him, this desperate hope for something more.
Yeah, you can feel that hope.
Yeah.
And that yearning for a future that he's been denied. But at the same time, there's this underlying sense that it's probably just a fantasy.
And that's what Ishiguro does so well. He doesn't shy away from those complex emotions.
Mm-hmm.
He shows us the hope, the despair, the anger, the resignation all mixed together. It's the full spectrum of human experience.
Okay, so let's talk about the normals for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
We get these glimpses of the outside world and the people who benefit from the clone's existence. But it's never really explained how they justify this system. It's like it's just become so normal to them that they don't even question it anymore.
Yeah, it's that whole idea of the banality of evil, right?
Right.
Like how horrific acts can become normal when they're kept secret and people rationalize them as being for the greater good. Ishiguro doesn't have to create these evil villains to make us uncomfortable. He just shows us how societies can just become complicit in these systems of exploitation.
Right. And the fact that the clones themselves are so accepting of their fate, it adds another layer to this whole ethical dilemma. I mean, they've been conditioned to believe that their sacrifice is noble. Like they're contributing to something important.
Mm-hmm.
But who gets to decide what's important? Who gets to say what a human life is worth?
These are the questions that stick with you long after you finish the book, and they're questions that are relevant to our own world, too, With all the advancements in science and technology, we have to constantly ask ourselves what's ethically acceptable.
And another thing that keeps coming back to me is the idea of memory in Never Let Me Go, the way the characters cling to their shared experiences at Hailsham, these little pieces of the past is both precious and painful. It's like they're trying to hold on to their humanity in this system that's constantly trying to erase it.
Yeah, memory is so powerful in this book. It's a source of comfort and connection, but it also reminds them of what they've lost and what they'll never have. And there's even this sense that their memories are being manipulated by the guardians at Hailsham. Like they're told that their art reveals their souls. But later it's suggested that it was just being used to assess them.
It's like even their most personal expressions are being used against them.
Right. It makes you wonder, what does it even mean to have autonomy over your own experiences, your emotions, your very being? For these clones, it's like that ownership is always being challenged.
Yeah, there's this constant theme of powerlessness running through the book, this sense of being trapped.
And it's not just physical, it's psychological too, right? It's like their hopes and dreams, their potential are all being limited. And that makes those small acts of rebellion, those moments of joy and connection, even more meaningful. They're these little flickers of humanity in this system of control.
Okay, before we move on, I want to touch on this idea of completion that comes up a lot in these excerpts. It's obviously a euphemism for death, for them fulfilling their purpose. But it also suggests this sense of closure, a finality that's both unsettling and kind of comforting at the same time.
Yeah, the way Ishiguro uses language is so interesting. He takes these ordinary words like donation, care completion, and gives them this whole other chilling meaning. It's like he's showing us how language can be used to hide the truth, to sanitize these horrific acts.
So we've talked about the clones, the normals, the system memory rebellion language, but there's still so much to unpack. And I'm curious, what about you, the listener? What's standing out for you? What connections do you make? Keep those in mind as we continue this deep dive into Never Let Me Go. And we're back for our final look at Never Let Me Go. And man, this book just keeps getting to me. The more we talk about it, the more I appreciate just how powerful Ishiguro's writing really is. It's not like a big action-packed story.
Yeah.
It just gets under your skin and makes you think.
Yeah, he really has a way of making you question your assumptions about humanity, about ethics, about what it even means to exist. And these last few excerpts, as we see the characters really coming to terms with their fate, it's really impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. One scene that just stuck with me is when Kathy and Tommy go visit Madam, hoping to get confirmation about the deferral rumors. They're so desperate for some hope, some chance to escape their destiny.
Yeah.
But Madame's reaction, her sadness and pity, it just shatters that illusion.
It's a turning point for them, I think. It's when they realize there's no getting out of this system that's controlled their whole lives. And it also says something about power, right? Madame, even though she feels for the clones, she's still part of the system. She represents those people who might have good intentions, but ultimately they're complicit in this injustice because they don't challenge the status quo.
It's a good reminder that just wanting things to be better isn't enough. You have to actually do something. You have to be willing to challenge the system, even if it's hard, even if it goes against what everyone else thinks.
Right, and in Never Let Me Go, we see what happens when people don't act. The clones, even though they know what's going to happen to them, they can't change it. They've been taught to just accept their role and believe that their sacrifice is for the greater good.
Which brings us to this theme of acceptance that runs throughout the whole book. Faced with this inevitable fate, the clones find different ways to cope. Some, like Tommy, they're angry. They rage against the injustice of it all. Others, like Ruth, try to find some peace by focusing on kindness and connection. And then there's Kathy, our narrator. She's kind of somewhere in the middle, observing, remembering, reflecting on everything with this mix of sadness and acceptance.
Yeah, and I think Kathy's role as a carer really shapes her perspective.
Yeah.
She sees firsthand what happens to the clones as they get closer to completion. Their bodies and minds deteriorate. She's there to comfort them, to witness their pain and regret, but also their moments of joy. And through all of that, she develops this incredible empathy, this understanding of how fragile and precious life is.
Exactly. And that makes her decision to become a carer even more powerful. She chooses to be there for her fellow clones, to walk alongside them on this path and offer support and compassion. It's almost like a quiet act of rebellion, a way of saying you're not going to take away their humanity, their dignity.
Right. And in that last scene, as Kathy drives off by herself into the countryside, there's this sense of both finality and uncertainty. She's lost so much, but she's also found some kind of peace, a way of accepting the life she was given.
It's a bittersweet ending, for sure. There's a sadness that sticks with you, but it also shows the strength of the human spirit, the ability to love and have compassion and to find ways to be resilient, even when faced with incredible loss.
And that, I think, is the core message of Never Let Me Go. It reminds us to cherish the time we have to connect with the people around us and to find meaning in a world that can often feel pretty pointless.
Well, that's our deep dive into Never Let Me Go. It's been a heavy one, but also really eye-opening. I know I'm walking away feeling a lot of different things: sadness, awe, gratitude, and just a real appreciation for the power of stories like this.
Ishiguro's novel is a gift. It's a challenge. It makes us think about the importance of empathy and compassion and connection, especially in a world that often seems to value efficiency and progress over the value of life itself.
We've talked about a lot today: identity, memory, acceptance, the ethics of technology. But at its heart, Never Let Me Go is really a story about what it means to be human. It's a story that stays with you and makes you think about your own values, your choices, the kind of world you want to live in. So I'll leave you with this. What would you do if you were in the clone's shoes? How would you face that kind of predetermined fate? And what kind of legacy would you want to leave behind?